Hi everybody, welcome to the next lesson in line of the Arpeggio workshop series. This lesson is based on the material that we covered in the previous one, so if you haven't checked that one out, I advise you to do so. In this lesson, we will not cover that much theory, but focus on important patterns. As you may remember, in the previous lesson we did some simple triad shapes. Although they are extremely useful and you can find many applications for them, it can be somewhat confusing to learn them all and place them on the neck. Today we are taking all those simple shapes and connecting them together in larger patterns. These patterns will very much look like the shapes of full chords on the neck, the ones that you can play on all 6 strings. As in the previous lesson, in this one we will focus on C major key chord triads. C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished or B minor flat 5. Every chord out of these 7 has its own pattern on the neck, and we have to learn all 7 of them. The good news is C major, F major, and G major share the same pattern in different positions, and D minor, E minor, and A minor share the same pattern as well. Only B minor flat 5 chord has its own distinctive pattern because of the flatted 5th interval. And this leaves us on only 3 big patterns to practice. And as before, in the end you will get backings with chords being played, so you can practice your arpeggios over these chords. I will give you simple up and down examples for practice, but feel free to modify the exercises to your liking if you want to do so. In this first video we will talk about major triad patterns, and let's first take an example of the C major triad. First of all, let's repeat that C major triad consists out of 3 notes: C, E, and G. Here you can see the C major scale, and now let's use only C, E, and G notes out of this scale. If we leave out the remaining 4 notes on the fretboard, you will get a clear C major triad arpeggio pattern. If you are familiar with chords, you may recognize some basic C major chord shapes here, like this one on open strings, this one on the 3rd fret. Here's one more, it's a G-shaped C major, a bit tricky for fretting. Here's E-shaped C major on the 8th fret. And here is one more here on the 9th fret, it's D-shaped C major. Okay, if we try to play all these chords note by note instead of all notes at once, we will get arpeggios. Now this way of playing is good, and these patterns can serve you well if you are trying to quickly go vertically on the neck, following only the strong notes. However, you can connect some of these shapes together to form diagonal movements and form larger note sequences. Here is one interesting run that can be extremely useful as well. Now I will leave you some time to learn these patterns well before we move on to the next video. In the second video, we will cover 2 more major chords within the key of C major. If you learned the patterns from the previous video, you will have little problems with this one, because we will use the exact patterns only in different positions. So how do we do this? First, let's see what are those chords. In the key of C major, we have major chords on 4th and 5th degree. These chords are F major and G major, of course. And let's start with F major chord triad. F major triad has F, A, and C notes. Let's focus on these notes within the C major key. Here you can see that the pattern for F major triad is the same as the C major triad that we used in the previous video. The difference is that the note names are now different, and we use different positions on the neck. In essence, if you learned the patterns from previous video, All you have to do now is shift them horizontally by 5 frets. And now you have F major pattern to work with. Same goes for G major pattern. G major triad has G, B and D notes, and it is located a whole step above F major one. So once again, same pattern, different notes, different positions. Below the video you can find all 3 major triad arpeggio patterns on the neck. First picture represents C major scale, and always remember that you are within C major key when playing these patterns. I will leave you some time to rehearse the positions well. Take it slowly and try to remember well where the patterns are within the C major diatonic scale. The better you learn the major triad arpeggio patterns, and the better you learn where 3 patterns appear over the whole major scale, the sooner you will be able to use it in your playing. In this video we are learning about minor triad arpeggio patterns. As we are in the key of C major, the first and natural step is to see what minor chords are within the key. We have A minor, D minor and E minor. And let's start with A minor triad. This triad has A, C and E notes. Let's take away all other notes from the scale, and as before we created new minor triad arpeggio pattern. If we follow the cage system where we have 5 positions on the neck, we can see that there are 5 basic positions for playing A minor chord. We have one on the open string, one on the 3rd fret, one on the 5th fret, one on the 7th fret, and one on the 10th fret. Now let's go vertically as before and create arpeggios out of these chords. These arpeggios can be useful, but even more useful are diagonal ones, same concept as the major arpeggios. Let's now create diagonal patterns out of these smaller ones and connect several positions together. For example, check out this diagonal pattern here on the 5th fret. Below the video you can find all 3 diagonal patterns for practicing. Use the metronome on your video player, but a slow tempo, and go up and down until you memorize them nicely. And always remember the basic C major key pattern on the neck as well, and where this arpeggio pattern is relative to the full scale pattern. By forming a strong connection between the two, later in your playing it will be easier to find your way on the fretboard. In this video we will cover 2 remaining minor triad patterns. Same as before with major triads, these minor ones share the same patterns, but they are repeated in different positions and using different notes. 2 remaining minor triads are D minor and E minor. D minor triad has D, F and A notes. And let's see where are those notes on the fretboard, by leaving out all the other notes from the C major key scale. This pattern is the same as in the previous video, and you can use all 3 diagonal movements on this one as well. For E minor triad we have notes E, G and B. By leaving out the others we will get the pattern and use the same exercises as on previous 2 minor triad arpeggio patterns. Below the video, you can see our basic C major scale and 3 minor triad arpeggio patterns within that C major scale. All 3 are the same basically. But I want you to remember where these arpeggios are located within the C major scale. As with all arpeggios, knowing the location of them relative to the major key scale will help you use them better and more efficient. Okay, we came to the last pattern for this lesson, and it is arpeggio for B diminished chord. Why is this pattern different from major or minor? Well, because B diminished chord has flatted fifth interval, so it doesn't have the same interval jumps as major or minor triad, thus having its own distinctive sound and pattern. Method for getting the pattern is easy though. Take a basic C major key. B diminished triad has B, D, and F notes. If we leave out 4 remaining notes out of the scale, we get B diminished arpeggio. Same as before, you can create vertical, diagonal, and even horizontal movements. Logics of the matter is pretty simple. The more movements you cover, the more diverse your playing becomes, as you have more possibilities for creating different lines on the neck. And for the end of this video, as always, there is a task, and the task is to cover all these movements well, so you can play them without difficulties and at will. It doesn't have to be on the fast tempo, remember that. So for starters, it is enough to learn them patterns well and precise, as speed will develop in time with proper foundation of precision and fluid playing. For the last video of this lesson, we will do a series of exercises to establish the knowledge that we covered in this lesson. To remind ourselves, we learned 3 arpeggio patterns on the neck: Major Triad Arpeggio, Minor Triad Arpeggio, and Diminished Triad Arpeggio pattern. Not only did we cover these 3 patterns, but more importantly, we learned how to use all 3 to cover all 7 chords of the C major key: C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished chord. For now, we will stick to C major key, but bear in mind that all these patterns are exactly the same in all keys, not only C major. So by learning them well now, it will be much easier to use them later, regardless of the key you are in. We also learned where we can find all these arpeggios in the major key scale, and these 7 patterns are located below the video, together with our basic C major scale. If you learn them well and learn to use them well, the possibilities for your playing are growing exponentially as more combinations are available, and better the connection with music when following strictly the strong notes. But as we know, we will get nowhere with talking, so we must start to practice. For this lesson, I give you a task of practicing all 7 patterns with backing tracks that you can find to the right of this video. Names of the backing tracks will correspond with names of the patterns. The way I want you to practice the patterns is this. Start the backing and you will hear the chord ringing together with drums. Here's an example of how you will play the chord arpeggios over these backings. For example, let's take an A minor triad. We can hear the A minor chord ringing, and I want you to go up and down. Like this. Repeat this for every pattern. In the end, I will give you one more advice. As soon as you become comfortable with these patterns, start using them with your current lick vocabulary and combine them with things you already know to play. You will see that new types of lines and licks will start to emerge, and the better you fuse this new knowledge with previous knowledge that you own, sooner you will start to sound better as well. For upcoming lesson of the series, we are starting to work on 7th chord arpeggios. These arpeggios have 4 notes and can be much more interesting as they are easier to play and can create a very specific mood within a lick or melody you are playing on top of a given harmony. So practice well, and I'll see you in the next lesson.